Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about one of the worst designed areas in Total War Warhammer 3. The Estalian, Tylean, Vault area, including Lorem itself. This area of the campaign map does genuinely ruin a lot of the campaigns that have to contend with the regions and provinces over here, as well as the legendary lords over here. So let's go over the problems that do exist here. First off, it's actually Mogr that is a problem. Mogr starts at war with Estalia, all of Estalia. So does Ikka. So every time you're playing a campaign over here, and you either have to deal with Estalia in the case of Ikka, or you're having to deal with Mogr and conquer Scaven Blight, like the say the Fey Enchantress, or even Belegar, then you are always going to have this situation where you're wasting time traversing territory that's always going to be destroyed by Mogr primarily, and it's not really going to be worthwhile to engage in. But you're going to be forced to do so if you want to contend with these factions. Beastmen in general can cause significant annoyances, but Mogr causes one of the bigger annoyances in the game. Because of his starting position, the fact he wipes out his faction, all these settlements except Tabaro, which Ikka takes after turn 1, all of these settlements are effectively going to become ruins. In some cases, you might see Ikka taking some of the territories over here, but him having full control of this province is very, very rare. If he even has control of more than one settlement on any difficulty. So you're just marching through a bunch of ruins that you can't colonize until you deal with the Hearthstone, and you get to deal with the fun aspect of Mogr. Another aspect on top of this is Scaven Blight itself. Like, for Ikka, it is particularly miserable to have to deal with Mogr, though, because you both start a war with the same faction, and naturally you might think like, oh, Ikka wants to take Estalia, but is a race against Mogr to try and claim Estalia before he just burns it to the ground. Not exactly a fun and engaging campaign situation. But then there's other problems in this campaign. Beyond the fact that even if Mogr leaves you alone initially, he might declare war on you. But then you have the issue of Scaven Blight. When you're playing Ikka, it is an awful start, but when you're playing against Ikka, or as any of the factions over here, chances are you're going to have to deal with Scaven Blight one way or another. Now, if you have the Underway, you can get to Scaven Blight reasonably quickly. But even then, you're going to be slowed down because of the Blighted Marshes, and yes, dealing with Ikka's nuke in that kind of context is frustrating. But imagine if you don't have the Underway, like, say, the Fey Enchantress, who gets screwed over very badly by this. You then have to either go for Estalia or for the pass over here in Lorem and through Belegar's territory in order to attack Scaven Blight. If you're playing a Belegar campaign and your starting settlement over here in the vaults is exposed to both Aranessa and Ikka, and to some extent you could argue it's exposed to Scrag. That means that as you're playing your campaign as, say, Belegar, you're not in a situation where, oh, as Belegar, I'm just going to focus on defeating these greenskins and marching on Carrick 8 Peaks. You're not going to do so, or you shouldn't do so, because if you do make that particular decision, you're then going to end up being attacked in the rear by Ikka and losing some very important regions for you. And for the record, if you're playing the Dwarves, Copper Mountain is a very significant landmark advantage that you should try and hold on to at the very least. But then there is the Wood Elves as well. If you're playing a campaign as a race who might have grievances with the Wood Elves, including the Dwarves to an extent, but especially Greenskin Skaven and Beastmen, then having to contend with Lorem is in itself an actual nightmare. You have 4 factions right next to each other. The 2 minor ones are not necessarily the biggest problem, but Durfo and Orion absolutely are. And again, you run into the issue of, if you have the Underway, you can deal with Orion reasonably quickly, but if you don't have the Underway, enjoy having to go all around to ensure that Durfu is wiped out over here, because he will take some of this territory in the southern Grey Mountains. Not exactly the best dynamic that does exist in a campaign. So you have enemies being able to attack you from multiple sides, territory that's exposed, but also territory that's not necessarily valuable either. Because that is the great problem in this area of the campaign map. Beyond the fact of having to rebuild Estalia, even if you have pleasant climate from scratch, the issue of Lorem looms large. You can take Lorem and invest significant resources and get paid back because the looting and sacking income, as well as the Oak of Ages, will generate a good amount of money. But the actual provinces themselves, the actual regions of Lorem, with the exception of the Oak, are not great for the vast majority of factions to take. For Order-type factions, it's easy enough. Just make deals with the Wood Elves. Or in Belegar's case, burn it to the ground because of the grudge. But if you're playing Ikekla, if you're playing Aranissa, for instance, or if you're playing Gorbad or Grom, you end up in this dynamic where you're spending a significant amount of time and resources dealing with an enemy that doesn't give you the rewards that it really should for the amount of effort that is required in the first place. And that is one of the significant problems on this subject. What do I think Creative Assembly should do with all of this? Well, first off, split Estalia into 2 different factions and potentially move Mogr away from here. That could help. But then you still have the issue of Ikekla. If you're playing Belegar, the problem of Belegar's campaign is the upkeep, the significant upkeep increase you have to deal with for a large portion of this campaign, where you're either spending a lot of your campaign experience with a plus 50% upkeep, which sucks, plainly put, or you're abandoning this province with all the consequences that come with that, going over here into Caracade Peaks, and then marching straight into Gorbad, Queek, Tretch, and even Skarsnik. There are significant consequences for doing so. For what it's worth, I do think if you're playing a Belegar campaign, it is worth staying over here, but it is not a great choice. For Ikekla, it's a similar problem. You either stay in Estalia and deal with the Mogr problem, which is a headache and a half, or you keep Scaven Blight, of course, but then you march over here in Araby to take this particular area of the campaign map, but then you screw yourself over because eventually Belegar, the Wood Elves, the Fey Enchantress will be coming for you. For Grom, it's pretty bad as well, because the climate here is not pleasant that he has to deal with, and I hope CA would change that with 6.1. Like, for Grom, you could just abandon Massive Oracle and go for Ulfon, but then you have to come back here anyway. So, not a great dynamic. I do think it's a combination of faction effects, climate situation, Mogr, the problem of Mogr, the lack of a path between the Fey Enchantress and Ikekla, direct path. Because Ikekla can easily get to the Fey Enchantress. You can't, however, easily get to Ikekla, so maybe that's something that could be changed. But it's also the consequence of the Immortal Empires map, and even the Mortal Empires map, just being squished together so tightly, and having a lot of factions in this small corner of the map. It's one of the reasons Old World is that much better of an experience. For all of these campaigns, like if you think of like the Fey Enchantress, or Ikekla, or Belegar, or even the Wood Elf campaigns, they are flat out better than the Old World just because they have more space to deal with in their campaigns. Also because Belegar starts near Caracade Peaks, or really at the border of Caracade Peaks in the Old World mod. So that is absolutely something to consider with that. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Let me know what you guys think, and what area do you guys think is actually worse than the Estalian, than the little piece of Estalian hell that we have to deal with in Warhammer 3. Costin signing out.